The Marine is on his back. The Japanese soldier is on top of him. The rifle is 3 feet away. It might as well be in Ohio. His hands find the handle before his mind does. 7 inches of carbon steel come out of the leather sheath in one motion, and the fight ends in 4 seconds. He doesn't think about the blade. He doesn't aim. The K-bar does exactly what the hand tells it to do, because there is no mechanism between the hand and the blade. No spring, no chamber, no feed ramp, nothing that can fail. The knife is his hand. When he gets up, he wipes it on his dungarees and keeps moving. Nobody writes a report about this. Nobody holds a press conference. The fight lasted 4 seconds and the man is alive. That is the complete record.
The K-bar is not a weapon that inspired confidence from a distance. It never frightened anyone from across a room. The Japanese soldier who died on Guadalcanal that night didn't have a doctrinal response to it, because there is no doctrinal response to a man reaching for a knife in the dark when everything else has already failed. That is the entire point. That is why, 70+ years after the last shot of the Second World War, the K-bar is still associated with Marines in a way that no other knife has ever been associated with any other branch. Not because the core is sentimental, because the core is correct. Imperial Japan built its infantry doctrine around what it understood to be the decisive variable in close combat: aggression. The Japanese soldier was trained to believe that the willingness to close with the enemy and die if necessary was the ultimate tactical asset. The bayonet charge, the banzai, was not merely desperation. It was a tactical tradition, especially in the earlier campaigns of the Pacific War, grounded in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 1905, where Japanese infantry overwhelmed Russian positions through sheer ferocity, absorbing casualties that would have stopped any Western European army. The lesson the Imperial military drew was clean and internally consistent. Morale breaks before steel does. If your men are willing to die and the enemies are not, the man who hesitates loses. For 40 years, that lesson held. Japanese infantry trained obsessively in bayonet fighting and close quarters combat. They were not deluded. They were right. For the war they had studied. What Japan did not account for was the specific problem of the Pacific Island Campaign. Terrain that collapsed every engagement into something smaller than a squad. Jungle so thick that artillery couldn't see what it was killing. Caves that turned a ridge into a maze. Night so complete that a man couldn't see the man next to him. In that environment, the bayonet, fixed to a rifle requiring a full arm's extension, became a liability the moment the fight got inside the reach of the weapon. The Japanese soldier had been trained to close the distance. What he had not been trained for was what happened when the American closed it first. In the early months of American involvement in the Pacific, Marines already understood something that hadn't reached the procurement system yet. The Jungle ate organization. Squads fragmented. Fire teams fragmented. Men ended up alone or in pairs, sometimes for hours, in terrain where the next sound could be a friend or a Japanese patrol, and there was no way to tell which until it was too late for a rifle to matter. The K-bar hadn't been formally issued yet. What men carried depended on what they could find. Hunting knives from home, machetes meant for clearing brush, commercial Bowie knives that varied wildly in quality. In the weeks following the initial Marine landing on Guadalcanal in August of 1942, the pattern announced itself in the casualty reports and in the after-action accounts that came back from the field. Men were dying in close contact where their primary weapons were useless. Not because the Japanese were better fighters at that range, but because an empty rifle in a foxhole at 2 in the morning is a club, not a weapon. A man needed something that worked when everything else didn't. The Marine Corps sent the requirement up the chain in late 1942. The language was specific. A fighting utility knife capable of close combat, camp work, and field use. Durable enough to survive tropical conditions. Simple enough that a man could maintain it without tools. Heavy enough to do real damage. Light enough to forget it was there. That last requirement sounds like a contradiction. It isn't.
A knife a Marine doesn't notice until he needs it is a knife that will be there when he needs it. Union Cutlery Company, out of Olean, New York, was among the primary manufacturers selected to produce the new knife, alongside others like Camillus. And what they built was not a design experiment. It was an answer to a specific question asked by specific men who had already paid for the education in blood. The blade was 7 inches of 1095 carbon steel. Not stainless, which looks better and corrodes less, but demands metallurgical precision to hold an edge through the kind of abuse field use delivers. The 1095 steel was easy to sharpen on a stone in the field, easy to maintain without specialized tools, and when it corroded, it told you exactly what the humidity was doing to your equipment. The thickness was chosen to resist lateral stress, the specific force generated when a blade is used as a lever, which happens constantly in field use and which kills thinner blades. The handle was compressed leather washers over a full tang. The steel ran the entire length of the handle, not just part way, which meant there was no joint to break when the knife was torqued. The crossguard was steel and positioned to protect the hand during a thrust. Everything about the design reflected one operating assumption. This knife will be used by a man who is afraid, exhausted, wet, cold, and in complete darkness. And it will be used once, without any preparation or thought. And it must work perfectly that one time. The K-bar is not a tool designed for the knife fighter. It is a tool designed for the man who has never trained as a knife fighter and will never have another chance. Peleliu, September 1944. The 1st Marine Division had been told to expect a 4-day operation. They got 2 months. The island was small enough that no point on it was ever truly far from the fighting. It contained hundreds of caves, tunnels, and prepared defensive positions, and estimated 11,000 Japanese defenders under Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, and terrain that the battle maps had failed to capture. A ridge system called Umerbrogel that the Marines named Bloody Nose Ridge, without irony or exaggeration. Nakagawa had done something the Marines had not seen before in the Pacific. He had abandoned the banzai charge. He had ordered his men to stay in their caves, to fight from prepared positions, to make the Americans pay for every foot of ground with casualties that would eventually make the island not worth taking. It was a cold and intelligent decision. It cost the 1st Marine Division more than 6,000 casualties before it was over. In the early weeks of the battle, the caves were the problem. Flamethrowers and grenades cleared the openings, but the caves connected to other caves. Cleared positions became uncleared. Men who thought they had secured a section of ridge found out at night that they had not. Private Russell Davis, attached to the 1st Marines, wrote afterward about what the nights on Peleliu felt like. The certainty that something was moving just outside the perimeter. The sound that was either the wind or wasn't. The moment when deciding took too long and the hand moved before the mind caught up. The knife entered more than one documented account from Peleliu in exactly that grammar. Not as a dramatic weapon, as the last option after the magazine ran dry or the rifle jammed in coral dust, or the fight closed to a distance where the rifle had no mechanical room to operate. It happened again and again across the weeks on the Umerbrogel. Japanese infiltrators moved through gaps in the perimeter after dark. A rifle engaged the first man. The second man arrived before the bolt could cycle. The K-bar was there. No special reports were filed because what happened didn't require a special report. A man was alive and the position was still held. Not dramatic, not celebrated. Functional in the only way that matters. What makes Peleliu the right lens for the K-bar is not that it was used constantly. It wasn't. It is that it was available every single time the scenario arose that required it. The Marines who carried it on Peleliu did not know, when they strapped it on each morning, whether that day would be the day. They carried it because the cost of being wrong without it was total, and the cost of carrying it was 11 ounces. Not a weapon you use every day. a weapon you carry every day, so that on the one day it matters, you are not the man reaching for something that isn't there. Colonel Nakagawa's decision to abandon the banzai charge was strategically sound. He had read the early Pacific campaign correctly. Mass frontal assaults against Marine firepower were producing Japanese casualties at a rate that could not be sustained. The cave defense would trade space for time, inflict disproportionate American casualties, and force a political calculation in Washington about the cost of the island campaign. His logic was precise. He was right about everything it was possible to be right about from inside his operational frame. What Nakagawa could not engineer around was the problem of the individual Marine at 3 a.m. with no ammunition. His system worked at the level of the regiment and the battalion. It worked in daylight when defenders could direct fire from prepared positions. It worked at distances where rifles and machine guns could operate. What it could not do was reach inside a man's decision cycle at the moment when institutional training, unit cohesion, and all the variables of organized combat had collapsed to one man in the dark with one option left. The K-bar existed in that space. Japanese doctrine had no answer for it because Japanese doctrine, like all doctrine, was written for scenarios that could be anticipated. The knife cannot be anticipated. It exists precisely at the point where anticipation ends. After-action intelligence gathered from prisoners and documents captured during the island campaigns recorded the specific dread that Marine close combat capability produced. Not the rifle, not the artillery. The Marine at close range who did not stop and did not retreat and did not hesitate. The K-bar fed that reputation not through how often it was used, but through one simple fact: it was always there. Every Marine who carried it was carrying the message that the fight would not end when the ammunition did. There is a line in the Marine Corps heritage that says the Corps fights with what it has and holds with what it is. The K-bar is both sides of that sentence. It is equipment. It is also a commitment, a statement that no matter how wrong the situation gets, there is still a response. That is why the Corps never gave it up when the Army moved on to other patterns and the procurement bureaucracies standardized around newer designs. The Army buys weapons for scenarios. The Marine Corps keeps weapons that work when all the scenarios have failed. The K-bar is still in service because combat is still, at its root, two men in the dark, and one of them has to stop first. The Marine Corps never forgot that. If you believe there is something worth preserving in that understanding, that some truths about human conflict don't expire, subscribe. We'll keep going.